You're listening to Let's Talk Creation.
All right, well, welcome back to another episode, another fun episode, and I use that fun in air quotes there. This is going to be a wild episode. Another fun episode of Let's Talk Creation with Todd and Paul. I am Todd Wood.
And I'm Paul Garner.
And Paul, today's subject is a little, let's just be upfront with everybody right now. This may be a little gnarly and gross. And if you're queasy and prone to being sickened by things, I don't know. You've been warned. You may want to fast forward through some stuff here. Today's subject is parasites. We recently introduced this sort of intermittent series. We have several intermittent series all running at the same time. Parasites fits into the sort of natural evil intermittent series. They're gross and disgusting, and yeah, we're going to talk all about them. So you've been warned. Now, before we get into the gross part, please like this video. And if you're listening on a streaming platform, your positive review, your review will help us to get seen and grow our audience, and we really appreciate all of that support that you give to us. And I should say we did get a number of donations recently, looking for special episodes, and we're looking to fit them into the schedule. There's one that's going to require some extra research on our part, but the other one should be relatively straightforward. So we're going to try to squeeze those in. And if you'd like to support us, support an actual episode with a subject that you'd like to see, we're totally willing to talk to you about that. So you just let us know, and we'll let you know how much that might cost. It's $600 an episode. I'll just tell you that. All right. So, Paul, I moved to Tennessee 20 years ago. From Michigan. Michigan was where I grew up, and it was, let's say, relatively tame compared to the forests of Tennessee. We don't have any mountains in Michigan, and the worst bugs we got really are mosquitoes. At least in my part of the world. I got here and I immediately realized, you've seen those like idyllic little meadows, grassy meadows, right? Where they've got the grass growing nice and tall and the people are running through in the sunset and it's all lovely. And you think, oh, this is lovely. Don't go in there.
Yeah.
If you're in Tennessee, don't go in the grassy meadow. That's where all the ticks and the chiggers, they're waiting for you there. And it's pretty nasty.
Yeah.
I somehow managed to get chiggers pretty regularly. I don't know how. Ticks I avoid pretty well. I've had a couple of ticks over the years. No tick-borne illnesses, I'm glad to say. But every time you get them, you wonder, why? Why would you make these horrible creatures like this, right? And so today we're going to talk to an expert on the subject of this nastiness to see what he has to say about it. So welcome, Jeremy Blaschke. Hey, Jeremy.
Good morning. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, great to have you.
Hi, Jeremy. It's great to have you.
Yeah. Jeremy is an associate professor. You're still associate, right? Associate professor at Union University in Tennessee. Jeremy has a doctorate in entomology from the University of Tennessee. He did his work on something called a parasitoid. And we're going to get into what parasitoids are a little later in the subject. They're like parasites. They are parasites, but they have a special nasty twist that most parasites don't necessarily have. So welcome, Jeremy. Why don't we start off here? Can you, and I know this is gonna get us into some complicated, problematic territory because there's always borderline cases, but can you give us a pretty vague definition, Bio 101 high school biology definition of what is a parasite anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this is one of my favorite subjects because I remember in my zoology class in college, had grown up loving animals, but then when we got to the parasite section, all of a sudden things are gross and nasty, and they're crawling all over you and in you and through your intestines and eating your
Yes,
liver.
yes,
And I just remember thinking, yeah, why God? Why? What?
yes.
All these wonderful creatures that I'd grown up loving, and there's a whole lot that are hard to love. So yeah, parasites are simply put organisms that live on or in another organism and derive nutrients from their host. So they live by harming other creatures, which seems particularly kind of nasty to me.
So you would, so this is sort of different from a predator, kind of
Right.
like a predator would
Um,
kill something and eat it.
Yeah, exactly. So this parasites typically don't kill their host. They live on or in it and then don't kill their host. That's the main difference between a parasite and a predator.
Right.
Predators usually have multiple hosts that they're killing.
Right.
Parasite is on you and you alone. That's its whole habitat.
And sort of, I've already mentioned a couple of easy parasites, ticks and chiggers. People,
There's lots of good ones.
yeah, people with
Yeah.
pets probably know more parasites. We in the developed world have an obsession with sanitation now. So we keep
Which
our
is good.
parasite load, at least the nasty ones, pretty low now, I would imagine.
Yes, yeah. Thankfully, in the developed nations, it's pretty low. But if you talk to your parents or grandparents, they probably remember huge eradication drives to get rid of hookworms and roundworms. Um, pretty recent American history. So in Tennessee, you go back 100 years, and we probably have a 30% infection rate of hookworms. These little tiny worms that get contaminated in mud and then crawl through your feet and into your
30%.
at least in
This
some
is
rural
horrible.
areas, it was really high.
They're in the mud and they burrow
Yes.
into your
Right.
feet.
Yes, and they crawl through your blood vessels until they find your intestines, and then they just latch on with this specialized hook mouth part and just drink your blood.
Oh,
Wow.
oh. So that brings up a thought. Every time you see, there's a big flooding. We just had a big giant rain yesterday. Every time you see that big flooding,
Right.
and I see people on social media out swimming around in it and wading in it, and I think to
Right.
myself,
Yes.
get out
Yeah.
of there. You don't know what you're doing. Is that right? Should
Yeah.
they not be doing that?
Well, so it's as long as the sewage is separate from the rain, you're all fine. It's when the sewage and the rainwater mix that's the problem. And 100 years ago, well, probably 150 years ago, we had a great idea to fertilize our crops with human sewage. There's lots of nutrients in waste, lots of nitrogen, and it's easy to just put all the wastewater on your crops, and that makes the crops grow nice and healthy and green, but it also contaminates the whole area with parasites. Millions and millions of parasite eggs, tapeworms, roundworms, liver flukes, all kinds of delectables.
I warned everybody, this is going to be gross. All right, so
Yeah. I hope nobody's eating their dinner while they're listening to this.
Well, at least there's no pictures. Talking about it isn't as gross. When I'm giving my zoology lectures, I get all these pictures and videos of intestines packed with roundworms and 30-foot long tapeworms.
Oh. So how bad can it be? I mean, if I had, say, hookworm, would I necessarily know it, or are there
Here's the
parasites?
interesting thing. Yeah, the hookworms probably not, unless you get an extraordinarily heavy infection. It probably, as an adult, you probably wouldn't even notice. So you live in Tennessee.
Oh,
Are you sure you don't have hookworms? The main problem is with developing kids when young children need extra nutrients, especially for brain development, and any parasite is going to leach nutrients from them. So most parasites are disproportionately affecting young kids negatively.
Okay.
But once you're an adult, you could have a little tapeworm and probably be just fine.
Oh, this is horrifying. I used to be a professor over here at Bryan College, and you know that, Jeremy. And
Yes, you're my professor.
All right. And I was involved with their museum there, and I remember going through the stuff in the museum, and I found this tube about, I don't know, about this long, right? Little glass tube. Inside of it was an ascaris, which is one of those intestinal worms, and it was marked in Cranmore Cove, from Cranmore Cove, which is where I live now, right? So this was this was collected locally, probably real close to my house.
Wow. Yeah, I did not realize that. That's crazy.
It's nasty. It's gnarly.
Maybe it was from a pig.
Let's hope so. Yeah, let's hope that it was a pig.
We'll hope that. There's a very similar species in pigs, so maybe that's where it came from.
I'm gonna go with that. It was a pig. It was a pig worm. So ascaris would be something that if you had a heavy infection, that would be a really bad one, right? Because those don't those block your intestines?
Yeah, yep. And there's a pretty gross video on the internet where you can find an extraction, a surgery where they're pulling out just heaps and heaps, dozens of these 8-inch long roundworms from someone's intestine completely blocked.
No, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that video. We're not going to link to that in the show notes. Okay, everybody, don't worry. Oh
well, so why do parts of creation make us feel that way? We don't feel grossed out when we look at giraffes or wolves or the dolphins. So why are the creatures that creep us out, gross us out, or we find disgusting, abhorrent? That's a really fascinating question to me.
Yeah, it is, and it's not just their lifestyle. I think it's also just the way they look. Right, people get all fidgety when you start looking at insects and worms and things like that, little crawly creatures.
Right, that's true.
And it's a real curious question. All right, well, can you?
Although I think the gross out part of the crunchy, lots of legs, lots of eyes part, I think that's an unfortunate bias on our part. Speaking as an entomologist, I don't think that is getting to something that's really wrong with the creatures. I think we just don't like those things because we associate them with death and disease and pain.
Right.
So we have a built-in
stinging.
I think a biological. Yeah, it's important. It's healthy for us to have a healthy respect for the crunchy, creepy crawlies, but that doesn't mean they're bad.
Right.
But I think that the tapeworms, there's a little bit different because it's not just a fear. It's a disgust. This seems to be not the way it ought to be.
Right.
You might not like spiders, but maybe spiders is a bad example. But most people don't look at spiders and think God shouldn't have made those.
That's true.
When you think about the tapeworm, it's hard to think otherwise.
Yeah, and fleas, I would say the same thing.
Right.
Fleas, you got the little crossover there, right? The insect and the parasite. What is the point of a flea? And a flea is so utterly unique, right? There really isn't anything else like a flea in the insect world. Fleas are fleas. You know them when you see them. They're horrifying. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially adapted to living on their host.
Yeah. Remarkably well adapted. Try to squish a flea. Good luck. Same for a tick. Try to squish a tick. It's really, really hard. You have to get pliers to squish a tick. Sorry again, we're going off into the gross territory here. Okay, so we've given some nasty examples of things, but I want to focus a little bit here before we go on to your own research. I want to focus a little bit on questions of design. You've already said, why, God, did you make something like this? Can you give us, well, maybe we could go through a life cycle or two and talk about just the exquisite, I think there's just some exquisite design at work here. And it's hard to come away from looking at these life cycles and say, this is just an accident. These guys just crawled into the wrong place and it's just an accident. Maybe we could start with a simple one, the tapeworm, good old tapeworm. So
good old tapeworm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's not really a simple one.
At
most
least
of the life cycles,
it's got fewer hosts than other people, right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Most of these parasites, they're going to have two hosts, and they're usually going to have an intermediate and definitive host, is what they're called, where they sexually reproduce and where they asexually reproduce. And so not only do they live in two different places, they actually reproduce in two different ways. And in their host, they look completely different. So when they're with tapeworms, so the human beef tapeworm, this is a 30-foot one that can grow up to 30 feet, winding about your intestines. This one lives in cows and in humans, but it doesn't live in the cow's intestines. It actually is eaten by the cow. The eggs, the larvae are in the grass, the cow eats them, and the larva will burrow out of the cow's intestine into the meat and form this nodule cyst called a bladder worm. And it just looks like this weird little nodule of nothing. And for most of history, we didn't really know what was that was its own creature. And when we did kind of crack it open and dissect it, we could see it's a strange little worm thing, but it doesn't really look like a tapeworm. And so for most of taxonomic history, we had bladder worms over here and the adult tapeworms over here, and we didn't know they were connected until parasite soup in mid 1800s. Actually, it was a German pastor. He was working on unraveling this complex mystery of the life cycles, and he suspected that these strange little nodules that he found in the beef were the immature stages of the tapeworms. But that went against the established wisdom. All the greatest parasitologists of that day said, no, those don't. It's not a cycle. Those are separate things. So what Friedrich Kuchenmeister did was he made some soup and filled it with the measly beef, little nodules, and then he fed it to condemned prisoners at a local prison. And after they were hanged, he dissected them and found little growing tapeworms, adult tapeworms in their intestines.
Did they know they were eating this?
No, I don't think there was a lot of consent forms signed.
Yeah. I don't think you get this past an ethics committee these days, would you?
I don't think so. No. Highly unethical experiment. But this was the first tapeworm life cycle to be discovered, which was really fascinating.
So let me see if I can follow what's going on here. The eggs are in the grass, basically. And the cow comes along and he's grazing and he eats this egg or whatever it is. And the little larvae then burrows out into his muscles and makes a cyst. Mm-hmm. Now, is this something I could see?
Yes. Yep. You can see it. You can feel it.
Just with my eyes. I don't have to have special instruments. Yeah. I can just see. There's
some of them are pretty small, but this one, you'd probably be able to feel it like gritty sand. If you were eating the beef and it's undercooked and it has a little crunch to it, it's not gristle.
That's probably
you probably made an error.
Okay, so we don't generally worry about that in the United States, right? Because we don't have sanitation problems like that. So,
right.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing because that life cycle then sort of depends on the cow dying and being eaten by something else, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
And so then let's say I eat some measly beef that has this nasty little thing in it. And then those larvae attach to my intestine and become the tapeworm.
Right.
Okay.
It's a really remarkable because your intestine is a pretty nice habitat, but they have to go through an enormously dangerous habitat to get to that nice, safe place, and that's your stomach. And your stomach is designed to destroy things. Right. It's filled with hydrochloric acid. It's designed to break things up.
Yeah.
So to get from your mouth to your intestines, you go through this acid gauntlet. And so these bladder worms are seemingly well designed to persist through the stomach unharmed. They have a nice hard outer coating, and the stomach acid doesn't do anything to them.
And when they get into the intestine, then that's when they figure out, this is a good place to hatch,
and they can sense immediately the difference between your stomach and your intestine. There's a little bile duct coming down from your gallbladder, and it releases bile into your intestines, and the tapeworm can sense that. As soon as they sense that rush of bile, they hatch, and then they have a nice little hooked head that latches onto the intestinal wall. And this has to happen really quickly, otherwise it's going to get washed downstream and out.
Right.
So it's a really well adapted, seemingly well designed,
So the
seemingly
tapeworm then,
intentionally designed.
yeah, the tapeworm then gets big, right? You've mentioned
Yes.
it could be as long as 30 feet, right?
Right.
And
Yes. Yep. So it just grows and grows.
now the anatomy of the tapeworm is pretty,
It's wild.
yeah.
They have no intestines,
Okay.
so they're essentially, an inside out intestine. That's their whole body. They've got a hook on their head. They have suckers on their head to attach to your intestine, and then they just have it's just an intestine, an inside out intestine. So they absorb all the nutrients from your intestine that you're digesting for them, and they don't have to eat anything. They just absorb the nutrients right across their skin.
Okay. And then
This just sounds like an episode of the X-Files, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all science fiction loves parasites. All kinds of crazy shows and movies and aliens.
yeah,
are based
Alien,
off
yeah,
of
Aliens
the
are kind
nasty
of a great
parasites.
example.
Yeah,
So
wow.
okay, so let me see if I still working this out here. So yeah. So then what's it doing? Laying eggs in there? So it's eating stuff.
Yeah, it absorbs nutrients, and then the body is actually made up of these little segments called proglottids,
Okay.
and each of them is essentially its own organism. So they have both male and female reproductive parts, and eventually they will get impregnated in your intestine, and then those individual segments fill with eggs, and then they detach from the rest of the tapeworm, and those egg-filled cases are then released in your feces. And then if the sewage goes onto grass, an agricultural field, that's where the cows get it again.
Right. So
that connects the whole cycle.
So back when we were fertilizing our crops with our own refuse, our own waste,
Yes.
that was bad because we were just spreading it around.
That was a bad idea. Yeah, bad idea.
One guy in the village gets a tapeworm, and the next thing you know, everybody's got the tapeworm, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
You mentioned something earlier about the tapeworm, the host, the cow, kind of needing to be eaten. One really interesting thing is that the closest relative of our tapeworm, the human tapeworm, as far as we can tell genetically, is actually a tapeworm that lives in hyenas and lions, which is very interesting.
Okay.
Why would that be?
Well, they're the predators, right? They're eating large game.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah. So the idea is we got these tapeworms by eating the same things that lions and hyenas did. So by scavenging lion and hyena kills, or by just predating on the same wildebeest or zebras that they were. So the tapeworms have probably speciated into our little human island biome. They probably weren't created there. So I think this is a post-fall colonization event where you have a cycle with wildebeest and lions, for example. We start eating the wildebeest, and we get the tapeworms from that cycle.
And then it just spins off from there. Cows.
Yeah, like this new home.
Our little cattle are a perfect host for them as well. And then our habit of keeping cattle and sheep, I assume they could go into together sheep as well.
Yeah, you get different ones in sheep.
Yeah.
Every domesticated animal has a whole bunch of happy little friends.
Happy little friends. Oh, yeah. That's fantastic. Well, okay. Yeah. And the other thing that I want to mention about this is that it's clearly not, this is clearly not an accident, this life cycle, right? It's extremely complicated, and sort of these different requirements seem to be very sort of intricate. You can't just expect the tapeworm to sort of live on its own in the environment. There is no way to imagine a tapeworm as a free living, earthworm.
Right. You've never seen a tapeworm wandering through the woods in your backyard, right?
Right.
You've never seen one of those.
Right. Yeah. So there's
which is one of the reasons for a long time people thought they were spontaneously generated. So tapeworms and other intestinal parasites were one of the last organisms to finally be shown to have an actual life cycle. And it wasn't until the middle of the 19th century, so 200 years after Francesco Redi did all his famous spontaneous generation experiments where he kind of proved that life has to start from life, you still had tapeworms, 30-foot long tapeworms that just appeared, and you never found their free living forms. So most of the scientific evidence was in favor of spontaneous generation for a very, very long time, because we had no free living forms.
Yeah, and parasites are weird, right? Because
Yeah, we had no idea that this little egg or this little weird little worm, this little bladder worm thing, that these were actually immature tapeworms or liver flukes or whatever.
because they don't look anything like.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh. How you doing, Paul?
And you mentioned something about intentional design and accident. So this was a big debate, also in the 18th and 19th centuries. People making the argument that God would design things like this, God wouldn't design things like this, and it's really just a fascinating historical debate that I think we're still having, because some people started using these new microscopes that were proliferating in Europe, and they started finding they could look at a tapeworm proglotid that was filled with eggs, and they could now see what looked like thousands of little tiny eggs. And so some people said these are eggs. So the tapeworms come from these eggs. But then other people said, no, there's not thousands of tapeworms. So it would be wasteful for God to design a creature with 10,000 eggs that only one of which results in gets to its right destination. So there's a really interesting discussion there about is God's design, can God's design be wasteful? Can God's design be inefficient? And I think that's the same question we're wrestling with today.
Yeah, among many other things. Why would God?
Yeah.
Why would you make a tapeworm to begin with? All right.
Can they be violent?
Yeah.
Can they be harmful?
So let me ask you so I mentioned at the top, you worked on parasitoids. So why don't you give us a little brief rundown of what in the world a parasitoid is? What makes it different from a parasite?
Yeah, so really the main difference from a parasitoid versus a parasite, parasitoids are usually insects, flies, and wasps, and they will usually kill their host. So we mentioned the parasites living on or in their host without killing it, but the parasitoid usually kills their host, usually by eating it alive from the inside out. So these are usually wasps and flies that lay an egg on or in their host, usually another insect, and then the caterpillar larva gets eaten alive by the wasp larva.
But slowly.
Slowly,
Right.
yes, over a few weeks. Yeah.
So it's not a matter of
An instant leopard eating a
predation.
gazelle.
You're keeping this poor sap alive long enough.
Yeah, usually the parasitoid larvae target non-essential organs. So they target the immune system and reproductive organs, and save the vital organs for their last supper before they kill their host and then burrow out.
Okay.
Yeah. And Darwin famously.
Yeah, Darwin famously talks about this, doesn't he? In fact, it was one of the issues that he wrestled with when he was thinking about the whole concept of design, and is there a God behind the things that he was seeing in the world of biology? That's
right. Yeah, I think parasitoids have long been that kind of chink in the design argument of nature, because there's a whole lot of parasitoids, and no one's really come up with a great idea for who designed them and why.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we mentioned this, Paul, when we were talking about the Natural Evil episode, sort of the introduction to this series, this idea of this, we're in the best of all possible worlds. This is a perfect world, and it's the best that we could get. That was the argument that was put forward. And so every aspect of design is somehow good in some way. We may not see it right away, but there's always goodness to be found in parts of design. And then Darwin comes along and he says, look at this parasitoid. This is horrible. There's nothing good about this creature. It's terrible. And
yeah,
it's hard to think, if you're thinking sort of in this sort of naive mindset that everything must be good. It really is hard to imagine how in the world do you explain parasitoids and parasites in general.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you worked on these parasitoid flies. You were mostly looking at, as I recall, you were looking at one it was a fly, right?
Family.
One family of
Yeah.
fly. Yeah.
Yeah. These were killer flies or bug-killing flies of the subfamily Phasiinae.
Okay.
So really, it's a really diverse group, really cool little flies. Most people, when I say fly, they just think of a little house fly. A lot of these are brightly colored, orange and reds, yellows,
Wow.
stripes. Some of them look like little tiny tigers. Some of them look like little ladybugs. They're pretty amazing flies.
Wow.
And most of them are pollinators. So I actually did spend most of my graduate days in grassy fields in sunlit meadows, frolicking about with my butterfly net, trying to catch little flies. I didn't get too many chiggers or ticks.
Yeah, well,
but,
you know, if you put enough bug spray on, you're pretty good.
Yeah.
You should be all right.
Bug spray's the lifever.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so the adults are pretty to look at. It's just
absolutely.
The children are horrific.
The children, the fly children, yes, they're not especially attractive. They don't have the bright colors and the wings, and they're not pollinators.
And
they just live inside their host and eat them
eating
alive.
these poor things alive. Okay.
Wow.
But I mentioned there, it is still a mystery to me why God would create them. I don't have a lot of good answers, but they're not pure evil. They're not a satanic entity. I mentioned they're pollinators. So these specific flies, they can form important relationships with the flowers. So they can help pollinate the flowers. And as parasitoids, they form a really essential role in regulating pest populations. So a lot of them, they form this tripartite relationship between the plants, the insects that eat the plants, and then the insects that eat the insects that eat the plants. And so there's the ecosystem as a whole is this interconnected web of relationships. And the parasitoids, while they might do something that to us seems evil, I do want to be cautious that I'm not thinking they're evil just because I don't want to be eaten alive.
Right.
Which I do not want to be eaten alive. But one thing I'm curious, does God feel the same way about parasitoids that I do, at least initially? Does God look at them and feel, ick? Why are they doing this? Or does he see something in their role in the ecosystem, in their life cycle that's really beautiful? And I think that's why I like those questions, because I feel like there's a mystery there about God, about God's purpose, and about the biology of parasitoids that we need to be pursuing.
Right. Oh, absolutely. This to me has been a big, parasites in general have just been a big, fascinating question to me, because I grew up, I was educated, right, in the 90s, in the big heyday of the intelligent design revival. And yeah, I mean, I get into grad school and thinking about these issues and thinking to myself, but how? I mean, there's so many things. I was in biochemistry studying viruses and looking at all these beautiful viral structures and proteins and enzymes and the amazing way that they
injections
work.
And all really cool structures.
Beautiful designs. Just horrible things, Ebola and AIDS or HIV. And the same thing with parasites. What do you do with a tapeworm? What do you do with these parasitoids? And I think you're right. There's questions of perception there, right? So we perceive them as horrifying, like you say, because we're anthropomorphizing. I would not want to be in that poor caterpillar's position, being eaten alive by some creature, taking out my non-vital organs.
Right.
Until they finally feast on my heart and lungs. But maybe God has a different perception of the situation. And I always have to think back to, we're living in a sin-tainted world, and it's a cursed world. And that I think that manifests itself in different ways as we think through how, my imagination is tainted, right?
Right. Yeah.
The way I
think that creation is good, but it's broken. And so trying to figure out which parts are good and which parts are broken.
Right.
I think that's what I love about biology.
And not just broken, but there are things I think that are intentionally made to function in a death-filled world. Right? I mean, you can't.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Well, talk longer about that.
Yeah, I think. Well, just predation in general. How do you? If, and of course this is a big if, so we have to acknowledge that. But if you can imagine a world where there was no human and say higher animal, whatever you want to think of as higher animals, they didn't die, right?
Let's say mammals and birds.
Yeah, sure. If those things are living, then yeah, how do you explain T-Rex? Right? I mean, I don't imagine a T-Rex out eating salads and stuff. That's
right. No, the design doesn't match the function.
No,
a poor design.
Right.
Yeah.
Same with lions and predators and any predator and parasites. I think just makes it more acute because they're gross.
Yes. And they cannot do anything other than what they do.
Exactly, right?
You could maybe force a T-Rex to eat something else, modify a little bit, but tapeworm's got to live where it's living.
Yeah, we've managed to tame some predators. We've got cats and dogs in our homes.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, having my pet Timmy the tapeworm, no, thank you.
Well, see, here's the interesting thing, and if I could kind of bring it back, I think there is a really great quote from 1713, because the parasitologists in the early days they were wrestling with exactly this question, and talking about Ascaris, this giant human roundworm. An Italian scientist, Antonio Vallisneri, he proposed that God couldn't have made this roundworm as it is in Adam's intestines. It's too evil. So he suggested that it was good. It was actually a kind companion to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it was only after the fall that they became harmful. And I think that's a really intriguing idea, because we were talking about the hookworms, the tapeworms. It's usually when you get too many, or they get displaced out of their normal habitat, that most of the disease and harm comes.
Right.
So I could imagine a very good world, and I have Timmy the tapeworm, a little companion that lives in my intestines, that we are in some sense it's quite Trinitarian, because it's multiple different species in one being.
Yeah.
And I would lose something about being human if I didn't have my tapeworm. We would lose something about being human if we don't have our bacteria in our intestines. The intestinal bacteria are incredibly important. So I just see the tapeworm as being a really big bacteria in that same kind of habitat. We've got all kinds of creatures that live on and in us, and I think I could imagine a world before the fall where this is God's design. God wants us to be an interconnected web of relationships, because that's kind of who His character is.
Yeah.
And then after the fall, things deteriorate, things get displaced, mutations occur that cause pathogenicity, and we get a broken world.
Right.
And we touched on this a bit in the episode that we did with Joe Francis, where we were talking about bacteria and other types of microbes and how they, in effect, sort of form this organosubstrate that underpins the whole of the world of biology and couldn't function without them. So what you're saying is that maybe some of these intestinal worms are kind of just a larger scale version of that, this microbial substrate.
Yeah. And not only that, but that I think by knowing something about God's character, we could maybe anticipate that this would be the creation He would make. So instead of being surprised when we find that humans are more than just humans, we are affirmed in our belief in a Trinitarian creator, because not only are humans connected with each other in a deeply intimate way, right? As a species, we require relationships, but as a species, we also require completely other species to function in our ecosystems well. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, and it's really becoming an area, even in medicine, where people are studying more and more about about the benefits of
Yes,
various
yeah.
sort of nasty things. Do you know enough? Could you say just a few words about
Yeah, so
parasite
I will say that
therapy?
I'm not a doctor, and I don't endorse
Yeah, please
any
don't go out and do this,
use.
anybody listening, but
Yes, but there is a really intriguing correlation between autoimmune disorders and a lack of
yeah,
tapeworms, a lack of intestinal
yeah.
parasites. And if you think for most of human history, we've maybe all of it, our immune system and our parasites have been primed to interact. We remove artificially, we eradicate all the parasites in our intestines, and our immune system is now running amok essentially. And so a lot of things like Crohn's disease and IBS and even some really severe allergies may be caused by specific immune peptides that usually target parasites. And without parasites, they kind of go crazy and they start attacking your own cells. And so some people, some doctors have started testing if can we infect you with a little bit of hookworms, a little bit of roundworms, a little bit of tapeworms that don't cause significant health problems, but will counteract the autoimmune disorder, which can be debilitating. And I think that's intriguing. I think this type of medicine, kind of getting back to Eden, if we can kind of unbreak the world, I think that's really intriguing.
Does it work?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the studies that have come out so far have shown really promising results. Again, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not. I
Right.
don't. I
Yeah.
don't think you should go walk around in human sewage hoping to get
Please
hookworms.
don't do that. Please don't.
And
Please don't
probably
do
a
that.
better way is if we could figure out how to synthetically make the proteins that the hookworms are making. So the hookworms are secreting something that inhibits your immune system because they have to survive in a very hostile world. So if we could get the benefits without the harms, that would be great.
Yeah. Because if you do infect yourself with a low level of hookworm, I imagine you would probably have to start taking worm medicine like your cat or your dog.
Yeah, well,
to make sure the worms don't go out of hand,
I
right?
think. Yeah. But so the hookworms, I'm not sure. I think the adults can live for 20, 30 years. And if you're not reinfecting yourself, you have that kind of stable population for a while. So it's you only get a really heavy load if you're walking around in sewage and getting generation after generation after generation of hookworms.
So the eggs they're making are not infecting your own intestines.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're releasing the feces into the sewage system and out to the wastewater treatment plant.
So just
where they get destroyed.
Just follow the little sign in every restaurant. Employees must wash their hands.
Yes.
Wash your hands really good.
Right.
So you don't infect the rest of the house with a couple. So a couple of hookworms can alleviate the symptoms of these nasty autoimmune diseases, which
there's some evidence to support that.
Yeah. But again,
that is as much as I would say.
Please do not go out and do this to yourself.
Yeah.
Because
but it's intriguing, and I think that matches what we would expect from a creation of relationships.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly the kind of creation that God would make, right? He would make a world where we're all sort of dependent on one another in intricate ways. And it's only now in our modern world where we have the germ theory of disease and we've decided that germs are terrible and we have to eradicate them all, that we're discovering, oops.
Right. Rarely are things all or nothing. I think we should definitely eradicate some germs, some bacteria, some viruses, some parasites. Sure. I think are probably irredeemable. But if we throw out everything that's non-human, that's also really dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. And every time
it'd be a really ugly world. It'd be really, depauperate. It would just be empty and desolate if it was just humans.
Yeah.
That's not a very good creation.
No, that's not a very good creation.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm really looking forward to, well, I guess I can't, but the next 100 years worth of research to see how much we're going to uncover that, oops, we needed some of those creatures we've been killing off for so long.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Other possibilities. So we've mentioned that on the one hand, we may have a biased idea about the design of these creatures, that we're thinking too much in terms of these things being utterly horrifying and utterly horrible and totally irredeemable. But clearly some of them are genuinely nasty and do genuinely nasty things. And so maybe we could mention, so one of the ways that this happens, and you've already sort of mentioned it, is when they sort of grow out of control. They go crazy. Is that common beyond just intestinal worms? Do we have that problem in other arenas of parasites where things just go haywire? And
well, I think there are 300 species of parasite that is exclusive to humans.
Okay.
So just about every part of our body, from our brains to our bladders, muscles, lungs, hearts, livers, every part of us is a nice little habitat for some little creature. And I think any of those creatures can proliferate to an extent that causes harm.
Okay.
But generally don't. There are these on our eyelashes. There's these little tiny arachnids, little mites that live in our eyelashes, and these are normally perfectly fine. They don't cause any damage. They're just part of our human habitat, and so they're commensal organisms instead of parasitic. And so commensals are animals that live on or in another animal but don't cause harm.
Right.
They get benefit from their habitat, but their host isn't harmed. And so I think a lot of these parasites, we tend to slap the label parasite on a lot of creatures simply because of where we find them. But in reality, until we know more about their biology, they might actually be commensals, like our little eyelash mite friends, or even mutualistic, so organisms that live together and help each other. So like maybe hookworms and us, we both might benefit from that relationship. And so I think we need to know more about biology before we see Earth as being just crawling with parasites, because parasites are a very thin slice of reality, I think.
How thin are we talking then?
Well, so just by parasite, it's really hard to define because life isn't easy to put into nice categories. But I think the more we know about biology, the less parasites we'll have, because I think we'll know more about the function of organisms in relation to their hosts. So right now, 50% of life is parasitic, but I think the actual number is quite a bit lower than that. But we gotta do more science. Got to investigate. Got to explore creation. Mm-hmm. Got to have more biologists who are interested in parasitology. It's a really fascinating field.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. Yeah, so we've got things that grow out of control. In my sort of more in my arena, bacteria and things. I know that there are bacteria that produce toxins directly.
Right.
Anthrax, for example. We've mentioned anthrax in previous episodes. Anthrax is something that actively generates a toxin that gets injected into your cells and kills your cells. And that's one of the ways in which you die so quickly, is because it's actually making this nasty stuff. Is there analogs to that? Do you know in parasites, are they actually making, I imagine they're making immunosuppressants, but are they making things that are designed to hurt you?
I would say, so I'm not, I don't know enough to answer really well,
right.
But I would say no. If you think about their life cycle, they don't want to kill you.
Yeah.
They actually, they want to keep you alive and healthy. If you're not healthy, they're not healthy. So there's this really interesting feedback where the more pathogenic a parasite gets, kind of the pressure pushes it the opposite way. So I forget what the theory is called. It's a viral
Red Queen, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not what I was thinking.
Okay.
But yeah, that idea. Yeah.
Red Queen.
But it keeps the pathogenicity of the parasite in check.
Right.
because if it wants to swing this way so that it infects more, it's going to swing back the other way because it's killing too quickly.
Right.
So I would say most parasites are going to be secreting some type of protein to suppress your immune system, or to antihistamine, anti-inflammation, anticoagulant to keep blood flowing. But they want their host healthy.
Right. Yeah.
Parasitoids, on the other hand, actually, there are some parasitoids. There's a jewel wasp that attacks cockroaches. And we found that the wasp larva actually secretes a really potent antibiotic all over the inside of its cockroach host to keep it from getting infected and starting to decay as it eats it alive.
Wow.
But
that's helpful.
That's cool. We've actually taken the antibiotic, and it kills methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. So it's a really, really cool antibiotic that this jewel wasp larva makes just to sanitize its little cockroach host.
And,
so
and
I
it's
think
killing cockroaches, so that's not bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you like cockroaches, it's maybe a little bit bad.
Nope, don't like cockroaches.
So yeah, cockroaches get a bad rap. They don't cause diseases. They don't really transmit a lot of diseases. They're just they're cool little creatures.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I am definitely not an entomologist. Sorry about that. But yeah, killing cockroaches, it doesn't seem like a terrible thing to me. Oh boy. Wow. Okay. So yeah. So most of the time, the stuff that these parasites are producing is sort of to keep the host happy and healthy, and maybe even unaware.
That.
Right?
Yeah.
The antihistamines, anti-inflammatory stuff is going to make sure that you're not feeling the pain of whatever this thing is doing to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Most of the harmful effects are secondary effects. Yeah. Intestinal blockages or iron loss or something.
So you mentioned sort of at the top of the show, we talked briefly about this idea that, healthy adults might have a tapeworm or a hookworm or something like that and not even realize it because it's so mild. So is that even a parasite then? If it's
that's the question, right? Yeah. So I think the label gets used too frequently. I think but on the other hand, as the same individual could be parasitic at a certain stage of life, and commensal later on, or it can be parasitic in one host and commensal in a different host, or parasitic in one environment, mutualistic in a different environment. There's biology. There's not really any rules.
Right.
Whatever works.
Yeah. So at the top of the show, I asked you to give the high school definition, and the reality is the lines are all completely blurred, and a literal individual organism can go back and forth being a commensal parasite depending on the health of the host, depending on what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And it could not even be anything about you as a parasite. You can be a commensal organism, but if there's 100 of you, so nothing about you yourself, but just about your companions, now all of a sudden, collectively, you are now parasitic. And that's fascinating.
It
because,
is.
Probably Joe Francis talked about displacement being an important origin for natural evil. I think that applies to parasites really well.
Sure.
Something's different, not necessarily displaced, although that would be an important component. Like when we were talking about the tapeworms from lions getting into humans,
right?
That's a displacement that wasn't original. But others times it's just you just happened to walk around in too much human sewage, and you just happen to get too many hookworms.
Oops!
More than your fair share.
Silly me.
You need to share some around. Yeah. Don't share.
Yeah, and I think this whole problem of when you really dig into these questions, you hear about ticks and chiggers and because you get them and they're nasty, and you hear about tapeworms and roundworms and hookworms and pinworms and all the nasty worms that you can get, and it sounds just horrifying, and it sounds like a very clearly defined problem in biology. But when we actually dig into the problem of parasites, we suddenly find it's all blurry and hard to tell. And it's almost sort of a matter of opinion at certain stages whether you should call this creature a real parasite or not. Is the creature itself bad, or is it just that certain effects that it's gone into have generated bad outcomes for the host?
Right. Yeah, and either way, I think there's interesting things to learn about both the way nature works and the way God is sustaining nature. Because why is it that God would allow a commensal organism to overpopulate and become parasitic?
Right.
Why is it that God would allow a tapeworm to be displaced from its host into a new host and make a whole new species of tapeworm?
Sure.
So I think investigating these things can reveal a lot about God and his interaction with nature, what he wants nature to be, what he designed nature to be. And we just need to look more deeply into the biology and the theology.
Yep. All right. Well, that is fantastic. Let's see if we can wrap this up really conveniently for everybody. So we mentioned that parasites are bad because they cause harm to a host. But we've also mentioned that that's not universal. That's not even universal to every individual parasite. That some parasites just get away with living on you and you don't even realize they're there. And we've said that may help us to understand God and the Trinity, the diversity of the Trinity, and the interdependence that God has built into creation to show us that we're not just, we can't just be on our own, right? We're not alone.
Right.
That diversity reflects God. And I also think it sort of, if I can throw in another idea here, it shows us our dependence on him as well. We're dependent on other creatures.
We're not independent beings.
Yeah.
So of course we're dependent. Yeah.
Exactly. So parasites have a lot to teach us on that level. But then we also see evidence of things, as you mentioned, displacement, where things have moved out of one host into another, and suddenly they start causing harm where they didn't before. And sort of degeneration where things have sort of fallen apart and parasites might get a little aggressive and start provoking more of a reaction in the body.
Right.
So lots of different things that the creation perspective can bring to the study of parasites. It does sound pretty fascinating if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly fascinating. lots of areas for new research, lots of new discoveries. Parasites are one of the least studied groups of creatures on the planet because they're small, difficult to study. So we may be completely wrong. There's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
So go and find a parasite and look at it real close.
But don't get too close because you don't want. You might not want it actually in you.
Keep your distance.
Timmy the tapeworm. I don't know about that.
Not yet. Maybe in heaven. Maybe in heaven.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a joy to talk to you guys.
This has been.
It's great to hear you, Jeremy. I'm not a biologist. I know nothing much about parasites, but this has just been fascinating. It's been great to hear you speak as always. Yeah. So thanks very much for joining us.
I feel like I'm going to have to wash my hands when this is over with.
That's always a good idea.
That's always a good idea. Yeah. So, Jeremy, if there are students out there, they say late high school students thinking, man, this is the most fascinating thing I've ever heard. Where can they learn more about Union University and joining up?
Well, we got a website. We're in Jackson, Tennessee.
Okay.
So West Tennessee. Yeah. And come take some zoology classes with me. I'd love to talk.
Yeah.
I'll show you some really good pictures. But yeah, if you're a high school student who wants to study parasites or biology, insects, we have a conservation major, we have a zoology major. So come and learn more about God and science together.
That sounds fantastic. All right, and we just want to remind everyone here, do hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you want to know when we release our latest episodes. Visit us at coresci.org/podcast to find archive and link to all the back episodes of the podcast. And If you're listening on one of the many different podcast platforms and you're able to leave us a review, we would really appreciate that as well. Paul, tell us about Biblical Creation Trust.
Yeah, Biblical Creation Trust is one of the sponsors of the podcast, and you can find us at biblicalcreationtrust.org. You can also find us on Facebook and other social media platforms. If you'd like to donate to help keep the podcast coming, there's a donate button on our homepage, and if you click on that, it will take you to all of the various options to give, including a PayPal account for those who are outside the UK.
All right. And in the United States, if you'd like to sponsor some of the work that we're doing here on the podcast, you can give to Core Academy of Science. That's at coresci.org/connect, where you'll find links to all the important content that we want you to see, and coresci.org/donate, where you can make a financial contribution. You can sign up for monthly deductions right off of your credit card, or you can find the address where you can send a check in the mail, or you can slip me some cash if you see me in the grocery store. That's fine. Any way you want to do it, we're happy to take it. Do remember that the podcast costs about $18,000 a year to bring it to you. This year is going to be a little more expensive because we got some surprises coming up that should be even more exciting. But we do thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you for putting up with our parasite episode. For those of you who have toughed it out to the very bitter end, we appreciate you listening. And we will see you back here in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Yeah, see you then. Enjoy your dinner.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Let's Talk Creation. If you have questions, send them to podcast@coresci.org. That's podcast@coresci.org. And be sure to let your friends know about Let's Talk Creation. And check us out on social media. Thank you.